webinar focused on hormone tracking with Mira and glucose and insulin monitoring with CGMs. As the clinical manager at Mira, it's my pleasure to have 3 guest speakers with me. I'll first introduce Dr. Sarah Peterson. She's the founder of Vera Fertility, where she uses NAPRO technology and restorative reproductive health practices to find and treat root causes of hormone imbalances and infertility. Next, we have Lindsay Haregrove. She is a registered dietitian with over 8 years of experience. She helps women optimize their hormones during preconception, pregnancy, and postpartum. She focuses on conditions like PCOS, thyroid disorders, endometriosis, unexplained infertility, and she supports her clients in achieving hormone balance and the healthiest pregnancies by using at Mira's Hormone Health Clinic and her private practice, The Planted Dietitian. And last but not least, I'll introduce Olivia Moeller. She is a functional nutritionist and founder of Live Nutritiously, which is a virtual nutrition practice. She helps women address the root causes of their hormone imbalances and fertility challenges to improve pregnancy outcomes. So thank you all for the 3 of you joining me in this webinar. It's going to be a really good discussion, and we have a lot of information to get through. But while people are still joining, I'll go ahead and ask a poll question. So for those of you, if you could please answer, what motivated you to attend this webinar? So were you looking to how you could use CGM and Mira together? Did you want to see how you can use hormone tracking or CGM? Are you just looking for new tools, or are you looking to optimize your own fertility and metabolic health and or overall hormone health? So Dr. Sarah Peterson, I'll direct this to you. You have extensively used Mira and CGMs in your practice. So how long have you been using those tools in your practice?
I started doing CGM about 4 years ago with my patients, and then Mira about 2 years ago.
Oh, that's exciting. So we have a good base of information that we're going to be able to use today during some of our discussions. And so if there is a question for any of the speakers today, you're welcome to write them in the chat. If you have questions related to what we're presenting on or questions about the tools, please write them in the chat. We have some of our team here to answer you. And then again, the speakers can help answer as well. And we'll also close with a live Q&A. So the agenda for today will be to go through the importance of hormone tracking, some advanced technologies, of course, the interaction between sex hormones, insulin, thyroid, and adrenals. We'll go through practical strategies and then real life case studies with Dr. Peterson. So again, if you have questions, please go ahead and write them in the chat, and we will try to answer them live at the end. Anything we don't get through, we will go ahead and write up the answers for you. And in our follow-up email where we send you this recording, we will send you the additional answers to the Q&A for anything that we don't get through today. So let's go ahead and jump right into section 1. So let's talk about how hormones are important for health. So I'll hand it over to Lindsay.
Yeah, so optimal health for women relies on the balance and proper functioning of the key systems we see here, including sex hormones, insulin and glucose regulation, adrenal function, and thyroid hormones. And they are all interconnected and related to each other. What makes women so unique is that their fluctuating and changing hormones play a crucial role in every single system of the body. These sex hormones are essential for women with functioning ovaries and cannot be overlooked. Without balance of coordinated hormones, women cannot achieve optimal health. And this is why hormone testing is so important. It offers valuable insight to women for their overall health and beyond just the presence of a regular menstrual cycle. For example, the World Health Organization estimates about 6 to 13% of reproductive age women are affected by PCOS, with up to 70% of cases remaining undiagnosed. This really just highlights the critical role hormone testing plays in identifying conditions that may otherwise go unnoticed.
I'll hand it over to Olivia.
And, although menstruation is typically seen as the star of the menstrual cycle, the real main event is really ovulation. And that's because ovulation is a key sign that the endocrine system and that ovaries are functioning properly. And it's important to remember that a presence of a period doesn't necessarily mean that our client has ovulated. And this is why hormone tracking can be so valuable, because not only does it help us confirm that our clients are ovulating, but it also helps us pinpoint exactly when they are ovulating. If a client isn't ovulating regularly, it's a signal to us that we need to uncover some health concerns that might be contributing to ovulation issues. So hormone imbalances, lifestyle factors, or it could be a picture of chronic stress. As practitioners, we really truly cannot fully support our female clients without addressing their hormones. Fortunately for us and for them, the technology available today, tracking and monitoring these key aspects of our clients' health, is truly easier than ever.
So let's look at that shift with the new technologies. So we know that technology has improved our ability to monitor and treat. So when we look at a woman, for example, and want to track their menstrual cycle, historically, we were probably looking at either like a calendar app method, or a patient might have been getting spot checks in their blood test, or maybe even mail-in samples. But either they were a snapshot in time, or they were data that's now already been passed. And of course, we know that generic app-based calendar methods are really only, again, a calendar method with predictions that are not based on true data that's happening to the patient. We could be using indirect options. So we know that an indirect measurement of estrogen, for example, is cervical mucus, or an indirect measurement of progesterone is temperature tracking. But really now the big shift in how we care for women is we can see now an ongoing real-time feedback. We see now that the data points are their own. And so when it's being fed into even an AI machine, it's not just an arbitrary generic calendar. Now it's their data points. We can also do direct measurements in urine metabolites, which are at home. Patients can test their urine at home. And with these real-time monitoring, we can also do real-time responses. We can see how the patient's responding to different sorts of interventions. So let's look at an example of the how this technology is different. So for those that don't know what Mira is an at-home monitor that measures urine metabolites in a laboratory grade result. This is distinctly different from any other solution that a patient might be using, because it's using immunofluorescent technology versus nanogold. Nanogold technology is looking for like a number within a range, or it's a more of a generic threshold, versus Mira's solution is, again, that I like to call it the raw quantitative data points, which as a provider is necessary in your practice. So let's look at an example. So let's say a patient comes to you complaining of fatigue, heavy periods, and weight gain. And you ask her what her cycle's like. And she might pull open her phone and look and say, well, my app says my cycle is 28 days long and is regular. But we know that that's not really the whole story there. From the ongoing tracking with Mira, we can really see, what does that hormone pattern look like? Are they coordinated? Are they balanced? Are they making sense? So then with that information, now we see the workup looks much different. And now the patient might get diagnosed with insulin resistance, progesterone deficiency, or PCOS. So it's a distinct difference between just relying on the patient's, let's say, memory of what their cycle is like, or saying that it's regular. Oh, Lindsay, go ahead and take over, but make sure to unmute.
Sorry about that. So Mira is similar to a continuous glucose monitor, or CGM, in that they provide a visualization of what's happening. A CGM can unveil hidden insulin and glucose imbalances, and hormone testing with Mira can provide valuable insight into the hormone dysfunction. For instance, a patient may report following a healthy diet, but through insight with the CGM, they can see, in this example, that both the patient and the healthcare provider can see clearly that maybe there are some discrepancies in what that healthy diet looks like. And this really allows for constructive feedback for a patient and helping them, empower them with decisions on how to make changes that's targeted to their diet and help them have more informed decisions with their information that they have.
And I would say it also helps you to see how individualized everyone is, because not everyone would respond the same way based on, even that breakfast that that patient had. So it's very eye-opening sometimes for the patient. So we can chat as kind of a group here about this slide for a second while those who are listening, please answer the poll question of, do you use CGMs in your practice? So there's, of course, many options there. But we can just do a little bit of discussion here. Lindsay, since this is one of your patients, can you just quick give us an explanation of the two pictures, right? There's one optimal, one suboptimal. So what's the difference here?
Yeah, so I had a client that was drinking coffee on an empty stomach. She was having creamer in it. It was an oat creamer. She was putting about 2.5 tablespoons. And then we had her do some tweaks because we saw that it was impacting her blood sugar. And so we had her eat breakfast first and then drink her coffee. Her breakfast was very protein rich, and she didn't have nearly as much of a blood sugar impact with this new breakfast. So she was very excited. She even said to me, I wasn't going to make changes until I actually saw this data, even though you recommended it to me.
Yes. So in some ways, the patient can't hide behind their, we'll say, healthy diet or behind their regular cycle anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll do one more example here. This is another time, if a patient comes to you and says, I have a regular cycle, based on their app, it may look regular. It's, let's say, every 28 days. But when we look at the actual hormone data points, we can see abnormalities, just like when we look at that CGM data. You see an optimal and a suboptimal. With the hormone data, you can also see something like that. This is just a quick example where the patient has pretty low estrogen levels, and they're not coordinated with ovulation. We're not seeing a nice rise of estrogen leading to that LH surge. So again, very eye-opening to the patient. So I see lots of questions in the chat, which is wonderful. Continue to write them. Again, we'll try to get to them as we go here. We're going to move into section 3, which is how hormones are interconnected. So as we mentioned in the beginning of the webinar, we know that for optimal health, especially, of course, for women, we have to have good balance, coordination, and optimal levels of these sex hormones. But they also have their thyroid, adrenals, insulin, and glucose regulation that can't be overlooked. So for this discussion, we're really going to focus in on the bidirectional relationship of the sex hormones and then that insulin glucose regulation. But again, we can't ignore the fact that adrenals and thyroid are also a major part in these things as well. So when we look at the current evidence that's out there or research, sometimes there's some inconsistent findings related to glucose fluctuation throughout a menstrual cycle. And usually this is due to limited blood samples, so a patient's getting their glucose checked by blood. And they're also using a patient's self-reported menstrual cycle. So when did your last period start? And that if that's done in retrospect, we're, of course, much more likely to be approximated than a real data. And so the researchers set out to really investigate the correlation between glucose levels and the phases of the cycle. So what they did was they took a group of women, they had them track their hormones with Mira, they tracked their glucose with a CGM, and then they also tracked some other biomarkers with a Fitbit. And in this study, once they had the specific data points of a CGM and the specific data points of their hormones, the researchers found a significant association between the glucose levels throughout a menstrual cycle. So they found that glucose levels peaked during the luteal phase and declined in the late follicular. And they found that these findings were consistent regardless of other factors. So they could basically control for these other factors that might be contributing to these changes. So we now have a distinct change. We now can basically prove that women respond differently in their follicular phase than their luteal phase. With this information, it really highlights the importance of, when we're analyzing glucose data, taking into account what phase of the cycle the woman is in. So of course, this can be helpful as a provider. If you're helping a patient, they can identify what phase of the cycle they're in, and they can also know when they would be, for example, more susceptible to glucose fluctuations. So let's look at this from the researcher's side. So on the right-hand side, you see the researcher's graph. And we have a real Mira chart on the left. So this is a patient tracking their hormones. So without going to a deep dive of how we interpret this chart, we can see very clearly when this woman had her trigger to ovulate here on cycle day 14, 15. With that information, we can define where the follicular phase is, where the luteal phase is. And if you look, this data aligns with, of course, what the researchers found. The glucose levels change based on what phase of the woman's cycle she is in. So this is, of course, fascinating information that we can use to improve our practices, because we now can look at not only how glucose is affecting the hormones, but how the hormones are affecting the glucose. So that bi-directional relationship. So let's look at this research article. This one talks about the connection between sex hormones and appetite, eating behaviors, and energy metabolism. They actually highlight how the sex hormones, such as estrogen, can decrease appetite, while progesterone increases appetite and increases food intake. There's additional information. Here's another study where we are looking at, like, I want to take a pivotal shift here. Historically, I think we always kind of looked at estrogen maybe as like the bad guy. It was demonized. Too much estrogen, of course, is still a problem. But if we look at, researchers are very clear that estrogen is actually protective. When it's in context of hormone balance and an ovulatory cycle, estrogen is actually a good thing. Estrogen can help with energy balance, insulin sensitivity, and of course, adipose health. So what's the role of estrogen in insulin resistance? So while estrogen has often been demonized, it actually plays a critical role in protecting us from insulin resistance. And again, this is when estrogen helps regulate those insulin-sensitive tissues and organs, making glucose homeostasis. So let's talk about some actual, we'll say, actionable items here. So let's look at a woman's cycle that's been broken into two phases. So we have that follicular phase, the buildup towards ovulation, and then we have the luteal phase after ovulation. So what are some defining factors of the follicular phase? The follicular phase should be the estrogen dominant part of a woman's cycle. So this is when estrogen's kind of front and center. Higher estrogen levels increase insulin sensitivity. So at this phase of the cycle, a woman requires less insulin to regulate her blood glucose levels. So at this point in the cycle, the woman is more likely to be able to handle, we'll say, or do better with their insulin sensitivity. Then we move to the luteal phase. So at the luteal phase, we now have a distinct shift in the hormones. We moved from high estrogen to now high progesterone. So the dominant hormone in the luteal phase is progesterone. When there's high progesterone, we have a decreased insulin sensitivity. So at this point, we now are more susceptible to glucose fluctuations. We might have heightened sensitivities to drops in blood sugar, and women might report more intense cravings or mood swings. So again, this Mira data really helps you to be able to define what phase of the cycle they're in, know how they might respond to how their body is, let's say, managing that glucose that they're having. So I'm going to direct this question to Olivia and Lindsay, like, how does this information help you lead a woman to better health?
Yeah, I love this because I think when I share this information to my clients, it can feel incredibly empowering because it shifts the narrative away from self-blame, right? So instead of my clients feeling like they lack willpower or self-control, they can understand that, you know, their cravings or their symptoms are driven by real physiological change. And I also love to empower them further, you know, to explain all the different ways that we can actually support their body, you know, through diet and lifestyle to minimize these blood sugar swings, cravings, etc. And Lindsay will kind of go through some of those strategies.
Yeah, so I really like to share with clients not only you don't lack willpower, but also you can increase your protein intake to 25 to 30 grams per meal, and this can help you be able to better tolerate carbs and also to support your body with lifestyle practices like getting more sleep during this time, adding more movement in to be able to tolerate carbs better, and help with managing stress in different stress supporting ways.
Great, thank you for sharing those. I didn't want to leave you out, Dr. Peterson, if you had anything to share in relation to this area as well.
I agree. I think it's really helpful for patients to know where they are in their cycle and exactly tailor it to their specific body because, like you said, no two bodies are different.
Mhm.
So, and able to pair that and whether knowing where they are in their phase of their cycle enables us to enables them to personalize it really specifically to exactly what makes them feel really good.
That's great. I love patient empowerment. Okay, so we can't ignore the fact, we've been talking about how the hormones affect insulin, but again, it does go the other way, that bidirectional. So let's now discuss how high insulin can affect the sex hormones. I'll shift that over to Olivia.
Yeah, so insulin plays a central role in the hormone hierarchy, which makes balancing our clients' blood sugar a foundational step in optimizing their sex hormones. We truly cannot help our clients balance their sex hormones without having blood sugar be part of that picture. And the reason being is that chronically elevated insulin can actually drive up androgen levels, such as testosterone, and it does this by lowering sex hormone binding globulin and directly stimulating the ovaries to produce more androgens. And what this can do over time is contribute to ovulatory dysfunction. So that could, show up as irregular or anovulatory cycles. And you'll see this in conditions such as PCOS, but this can even happen outside of PCOS. Additionally, this one I feel like is not as talked about as much, but high insulin levels can also negatively impact egg quality, and it could increase oxidative stress. And all this can further disrupt hormonal imbalance. So as I mentioned before, balancing our clients' blood sugar is really a key step in optimizing their overall health.
That's wonderful. And I don't know if the presenters can see in the chat, but we're getting some really good questions and positive reinforcement of they're loving all this great information. So thank you again for the three of you being here. So to summarize what we covered so far, women's hormones play a critical role in overall health. It's important to recognize that they're deeply connected and bidirectional with the insulin and glucose regulation. And because these systems influence each other, it's really essential that we take into account both of them. So tracking hormones isn't just important. Tracking glucose isn't just important. It's really critical for achieving optimal patient outcomes, providing you the best complete picture that you can have on your patient. So if we we'll start with hormones, then we'll talk about glucose, but hormone tracking really can be that early detection. So it can be a warning sign. So the hormones, of course, we are different every cycle. And so our hormones can always be getting better or worse from one cycle to the next. That's why it's important for this ongoing type of tracking. It also can be, and we'll see this in Dr. Pearson's case study, that it's an immediate kind of in your face, something is wrong. Right away, you can see it. And so early detection. It's also that kind of switching of our mindset or that approach of instead of just assuming the hormones are fine until proven otherwise, like your cycles, 28 days is regular, it's fine. Instead saying, let's check and make sure they're fine. So we're changing our mindset around the women's hormones. It's also very data driven. And so many patients, we talked about this with some of these examples, when they see it, they're now convinced. They're convinced to do something different, or they're now seeing in real time, like, oh, wow, that when I do these different lifestyle strategies, it does affect my hormones. That can be positive or negative. They can see as they change things, wow, I'm making a lot of progress. My hormones are improving. So it's that positive feedback, but it can also be the negative where, again, they see it and they're like, oh, wow, something's really wrong. And the good news is both of those can be a catalyst for change. And so using that in your practice can be very helpful. And of course, it is very validating for the patient to be able to see it in real time, because we know we are unfortunately a generation of day-to-day data. We want to see what was our sleep score, what is our, all these different things. We want feedback right away. And so when we test hormones at home, it can be graphed out to them and show them what is happening in real time. So lots of, positives about hormone tracking. But I really like to use examples because examples really drive home. We can talk about all these good things, but let's look at some chart examples. So here's a woman who comes to you and she reports a 19-day cycle. Now, it doesn't probably matter if she's a new patient to you or a current patient of yours. Prior to this detailed hormone tracking, we probably were unsure what just happened. She said she bled and then 19 days later she bled again. So was it an anovulatory cycle? Did she have breakthrough bleeding? What just happened? But when she's hormone testing, we can immediately make now a real discernment of what just happened. So this patient, we can see here, she started testing and she had a very early LH surge on cycle day 5. But when you look, she had coordinated estrogen. Her estrogen was changing related to that LH surge and her progesterone went up. So this one actually had an ovulatory event around cycle day 5. Now, is this optimal? No, this is not optimal. I do see some questions in the chat. Let me give a quick tour here. Along the bottom is the cycle day. So cycle day 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. And then we have the day of the month. So this is January 6, 7, 8, and so on. The block lines are estrogen, or more specifically E3G, the urine metabolite of estrogen. And then we have the turquoise is the LH surge. So right here, this LH surge happened on cycle day 5. And then the purple is progesterone, or more specifically, the urine metabolite of PDG. So again, to give a quick tour here, this patient had an abnormally early LH surge triggering ovulation on cycle day 5. And in this case, because it was coordinated with estrogen, it did successfully trigger formation of a corpus luteum. Is this an ideal pattern? No, we don't want our women ovulating right after their period ends. But it explains now this 19-day cycle. And so again, how empowering would it be to the patient to now say to her in a chart review or during a visit, say, I understand what just happened in this cycle. Although not ideal, I now know what just happened. So let's look at another one. Here we have a 50-year-old patient who began testing, and we actually see she's still having coordinated hormones and ovulatory events. Now, again, at 50, we can't, of course, determine how healthy of a egg quality that is, but her hormones are still coordinated. We can see that because, again, these black lines of estrogen, they are rising around the time of the LH surge, the trigger to ovulate here on cycle day 15, 16, and then her progesterone changes afterwards. Now, have to be very clear, her progesterone is actually very low and her luteal phase is short. Both of those would be considered abnormalities, but for her physiological age, it physiologically makes sense. As 50, we have that natural decline of progesterone. Again, the health of her eggs are not as good, so the corpus luteum is not as good. There's a lot of things that lead to that decline of progesterone. But we can still see this woman is having coordination. So how you approach this patient may be completely different than even the next patient I'm going to show you. She's similar age, she's 49, but this patient is having high fluctuating estrogen that's no longer coordinated with her LH surge. So it's not triggering ovulation. So this is an anovulatory cycle. She does not get progesterone changes. And so this patient, both of them may come see you in the same week, but their hormone patterns are completely different. And what your next treatment recommendations are will likely be very different from the patient who has coordinated hormones, still having ovulatory events, versus the patient who's not having coordination, now having anovulatory cycles. So again, this really, especially for the perimenopausal patients, can be very validating and can help them to make sense of what's happening because they can actually see it now. They can see the dysfunction or they can see the coordination. And again, that might help you to decide how you want to treat them. So there's one more example. This one's my favorite because I think historically a patient like this would have been very confused. So she has PCOS. This scenario could be many things. She could be trying to conceive. She could be trying to balance her hormones. She could just be trying to get regular cycles. Like that might be her only goal. She's like, my cycles are so sporadic. I don't know when they're coming and going. I just want regular cycles. But we know, of course, what a regular cycle means is coordinated regular hormones. So let's look at her cycle here. We pick up on cycle day 6. So you can see her period just ended. She started consistently testing here on cycle day 9. And then we see this nice coordinated estrogen, the black lines, leading to an attempt at an ovulation. She gets this nice LH surge here on cycle day 17, 18. This looked like a very good ovulatory event. But unfortunately, if we look closely, her progesterone did not go up and stay up. So we know this is now a failed attempt at an ovulation. This did not trigger ovulation. So this patient continues on testing. We see a second rise of estrogen, a second LH surge, and now her progesterone changes. It's now her ovulatory event. So this patient did not simply just have another long irregular cycle. She had, I like to call it a stutter step, where her body tried to ovulate, failed, and then it tried again. This is completely different than just having, I like baseline low hormones or suppressed hormones for a really long time, and then they finally start doing something. This is very different. And for the provider, this could help you in many different ways. Let's say you were trying to define her follicular versus luteal phase. You would clearly be able to see a couple days in after the LH surge, she actually did not switch over to the luteal phase yet. She's still in her follicular phase. This follicular phase is very long, goes all the way until, I suspect ovulation was around cycle day 29, 30. And so you can see her luteal phase did not start until way over here. For the patient standpoint, let's say she was testing with maybe LH test strips, for example. She likely would have gotten positives here, stopped testing, and then been very confused when more than 20 days later, she was not having a period. And, her pregnancy tests are negative, and she's like, I don't know what just happened. I should have ovulated around cycle day 17, 18. So again, this amount of detail is helpful both from the patient side, but also from the provider side to really make sense of what's happening on the hormonal level. So let's go ahead, and I think I have a poll question for everyone. I do. So let me go ahead and throw it in the poll section. If you could please answer, what educational resources would be the most helpful for you? So would it be most helpful to do webinars on clinical cases like we're going to do today? Or it would be more based on your type of practices? So you'd like something targeted, let's say, to acupuncturists or to OBGYNs or to health coaches? Would you like it divided based on provider practices or provider types? Would it help you to talk to a provider, such as the 3 speakers we have here today that use Mira in their practice? Would it be a provider training course or other sort of clinical resources? So protocols, research studies, guides, what would be the most helpful for you? And unfortunately, you only get to choose one. So which one would be the most helpful for you? So while you answer that question, we're going to go ahead and switch over from hormone testing to now the importance of glucose tracking. So we know glucose insulin regulation is really important. And a CGM is a great tool, just like Mira, that visualizes to the patient what is happening. So I will hand it over to Lindsay first.
Yeah, so a CGM really helps patients see how their body actually responds to different foods and helps them make empowered choices around their foods throughout the day. And then a CGM also helps to identify glucose triggers. So it helps to pinpoint specific foods or combinations of foods or situations that cause glucose spikes and allows them to make changes to their diet based on that information.
Yeah, and it also serves as an early warning system for potential glucose imbalances, which sometimes can be missed with your standard lab testing. And it provides that real-time data to help uncover hidden patterns that clients may be not aware of. And then it allows you as a practitioner to make more proactive interventions before bigger issues arise. And it also removes the emotion from the equation, offering up objective data that can be really eye-opening for clients. I'm sure plenty of you have clients that need to see the numbers before they're willing or maybe, really motivated to make change. especially if they feel fine or they don't realize that their food choices may be impacting their blood sugar negatively. And it also provides validation and reinforcement, right? Sticking to dietary and lifestyle changes takes effort, it takes time, and it's not always easy for clients, right? So this real-time tracking can help them see the impact of their choices. So whether it's hormone tracking with Mira or glucose monitoring with the CGM, having that tangible proof of progress makes it a lot easier for our clients to stay motivated and committed to that long-term health goal.
And last but not least, it really helps to motivate the client with this data. Like Mira for hormones, CGMs really provide that personalized, actionable data, and it helps them feel like they are in the driver's seat when it comes to their health. So lots of amazing things that a CGM and Mira can do to support clients and the provider.
Wonderful. So there is a provider platform that some of you may be familiar with, but the Thea app is a provider platform and also a patient app that allows you to analyze CGM data in a similar way that Mira does. So it's really taking more of a step above just tracking. And so you can see here just a quick page on the Thea app will show you, for example, glucose spikes, glucose dips, how much time is within range, their average glucose. It's also an average daily score, which we'll talk about more in a moment, and average food scores, along with, of course, the actual data itself. So if we were using, for example, just the CGM, you might only get this bottom section, whereas this provider platform really gives you a more in-depth monitoring with that analysis at the top, but additionally things like a score for a meal. So this is an example where the patient had sourdough pancakes, no syrup, no toppings, but was eaten on an empty stomach. And so this score, it's out of 100. Lower is worse. Best score is 100. And we can see how this patient responded to this situation. So they factor in things like how high did the glucose spike? What was the glucose level at 75 minutes? And then how long did it take to stabilize? So in this example, it took over 3 hours for this patient's glucose to stabilize. And so that can be, again, it's not just what did the glucose go to. There's also a lot of other factors that are very important. So another example of that, you can see like the lowest scoring. So let's say you really wanted to make the most impact for a patient. You could look at their lowest scoring food items and say like, these might be things that you want to eliminate from your diet because you don't respond very well to these things. So looking at a patient's own personalized food choices, how they do and what that score is can be very helpful. So go ahead, Lindsay.
Yeah, well, I was just going to add that this detailed information just really helps patients be able to understand how foods work well for their blood sugars and what ones need to have work. Like I mentioned before with that coffee example, simple tweaks can really help to improve their results really fast, and then they can try it again the next day and support their body.
Yeah, so I think it looks like in the chat, some people are just asking basically the differences between the Libre and Thea. So the Thea team is welcome to answer additional questions for you. But I would say my quick answer to that would be it is analysis and in-depth interpretation versus just the hormone values themselves. So they give you more actionable items immediately. So we're going to be switching over to the case studies, but we will come back around if you have questions for the panelists and go ahead and keep putting them in the chat. But for now, I'll answer or throw out one more poll question for you here before we switch over to the case studies with Dr. Peterson. So here comes the poll question. This one is, what would be the most valuable benefit of using Mira in your practice? So it would be personalizing and improving treatment plans, helping to make health insights more accessible for all, and really engaging the patients, offering additional support, or all of the above. So I'll let you go ahead and answer those questions, and we're going to get started with the case studies. I'll hand it over to Dr. Peterson.
Hello, I'm Sarah Peterson. I have a clinic in Denver called Vera Health and Fertility, and I really specialize in fertility and balancing women's hormones in a holistic way. So I use glucose monitoring and Mira all the time because As Lindsay and Olivia spoke to, it's really important to be really personalized in your care, and this gives you a huge advantage to really taking care of patients. So I have a couple cases for you. These are my actual patients. So the first one was a 32-year-old female. She's never been pregnant before. She came to me and she said, Sarah, I have these really long cycles. I have all kinds of spotting, and I want to figure out what's going on. Like, what's the root cause of this? So she'd been to a number of previous providers in the past, and they had diagnosed her with Hashimoto's and a high prolactin, and she was on various supplements. And she, as far as she could tell, she wasn't ovulating, and she never had an ovulatory cycle, and she only had a period and if she was having progesterone and having a progesterone withdrawal bleed. So definitely lots of things to work on there. And then a previous provider had put her on cabergoline, which is a medication to lower prolactin in an attempt to get her cycles a bit more regular. So on her labs, her AMH, or her anti-Müllerian hormone, is a 6. It's funny because I think in hormone and fertility world, I call them Goldilocks numbers. Like, you want everything to be perfect. Same thing when you're looking at Mira. It's like, you don't want it to be too high, you don't want it to be too low. High is not always good. So her AMH is actually a bit high, which means, okay, she probably has some kind of underlying insulin resistance that we need to look into. But her FSH and LH are relatively well balanced, so that shows me that her pituitary is functioning well. But one thing that really stood out to me too is that her hemoglobin A1C was 5.9, which is really high in a 32-year-old, otherwise very healthy person. And this is the diagnosis of prediabetes, and no one had ever told her that. And her prolactin, it was a little elevated, but not horribly high, and her body was making a good amount of estrogen. But her thyroid antibodies also were, yes, they were elevated, but they really weren't that high. So when she had come to me, she was following a gluten-free diet, because a lot of times if patients have Hashimoto's, they'll be put on a gluten-free or a dairy-free diet, and she was eating a lot of meat and vegetables and only eating a few basic grains. For example, she was eating a lot of white rice, that kind of a thing. She wasn't exercising. She didn't really have good sleep at all. And she had really bad gut health. So lots of constipation, bloating, gas. So a lot of red flags there. So I had her do Mira. And what is interesting about this is she did eventually have an LH surge, but she has it really, really late in her cycle, on cycle day 41. And then she actually, because she didn't think that she had had a surge, she had started taking oral progesterone, which is why her progesterone looks so high. And her estrogen is also very flat. And usually you want to see it be much higher around the time of her LH surge. So she basically wasn't really making enough estrogen in order to support a healthy ovulation and a healthy LH surge. And her body was trying to ovulate, but she still had to take oral progesterone in order to have regular cycles. And this was a 52-day cycle with an LH surge on cycle day 41. So my goal for patients is always to get them to be having regular cycles, 35 days or less, ovulating mid-cycle, and having around a 12 to 16-day luteal phase, depending on the person. So lots of goals to set for her here. And then this just zooms in a little bit on that second cycle. She does have an LH surge on cycle day 19, you can see, but it's not an ovulatory cycle. So her estrogen isn't getting high enough to trigger an LH in order to get that progesterone rise to confirm ovulation. So this is why she's been having such irregular cycles and so much irregular bleeding, is because her estrogen's never getting high enough in order for her to ovulate. So I had her do glucose monitoring, and her average glucose is really high at 112. My goal for my patients is around 100 or less. So she has a lot of insulin resistance. And no one had ever talked to her about that before, or ever talked to her about how her diet could be affecting her hormone levels. So she, for example, like, she would eat a turkey sandwich and then she would have these huge spikes. So spiking to 183 on a glucose monitor is quite high in a person who's otherwise healthy. Usually you never want to spike higher than 140, or ideally never 20 above your baseline. So if your baseline is 100, you never want to spike higher than 120. So she was eating these gluten-free grains, like this ancient grain bun, and she was eating some protein if she's getting turkey, but it was really, really spiking her. So the goal was to tailor her diet in order to promote this really healthy estrogen production to get her ovulating regularly. So other things that I like to do in my practice is anything that a patient tells me, of course, I like to be a detective and dig that up. So she was having a lot of inflammation, and so I found out that she had a corn sensitivity. So that's just one big thing that you always want to look for when patients' hormones are off, is there any other sources of inflammation? Because that can really affect your ability to make estrogen. And then because she had such horrible gut symptoms, then I did a gut health test, and she just really wasn't digesting her food well, which is also huge, because if she's not getting the nutrients that she needs to support her estrogen and progesterone production and decrease inflammation, then she's not going to be able to make hormones in proper amounts. So I started her on some digestive enzymes and things to help her digest better. And then one thing that I really like to do is always tailor the diet to the person. For example, sometimes if people have Hashimoto's, going gluten-free can really help bring their antibodies down, but it can also decrease their estrogen production. So you have to be careful of just doing universal things, and you really want to watch exactly what's happening. So I actually had her reintroduce gluten because it wasn't appearing to inflame her just from a symptoms perspective, to really help support her estrogen production and focus on some of those grains where we could get a lot of diversity and really help her gut health without spiking her blood sugar. And then I really increased her protein and had her do some more grains. And then she also wasn't doing a lot of omega-3 foods or fish. So I had her incorporate that because that's huge in focusing on estrogen production. And then I had her do DHEA to support her adrenal glands and her estrogen production. And then because she had such crazy insulin resistance, I started her on metformin. I don't always start everybody on medications, and usually I have them do diet first, but sometimes people need a little bit of a hormonal reset, which is where it can be helpful, or an insulin reset and a glucose reset, where it can be helpful to introduce some medications. So I started her on metformin to see if we could really get that blood sugar under control. So this was her first cycle incorporating all of those changes, and you can see that it made a huge benefit, because before she wasn't having an LH surge until cycle day 40, and now she's having an LH surge, like a good LH surge on cycle day 24. And you can see that her progesterone is higher on the time of that LH surge, and she finally is ovulating because she has a progesterone rise. So it's amazing how Lindsay and Olivia were saying, if you show a patient the data, they'll start to believe you, because sometimes they won't believe you unless they actually see it. But she was so happy, because also I make these patients do a lot of things. And so if you're going to have a patient do all this homework, it's really helpful for them to see that it's actually paying off. So to see, like, oh my gosh, I'm doing all these things and Dr. P is making me eat this way and track all these things, and to see, like, oh my gosh, I've ovulated in the first time in years, and I've never even had to take any ovulation medications or any hormones or anything. Like, this can be completely done with my diet and monitoring, was super, super empowering to her. So, and it's kind of fun. I'm a fertility doctor, so those are sort of my wins, but she ended up getting pregnant on this cycle. So she was so thrilled, like the very first cycle she ever ovulated. So I also just want to make sure, if we're reintroducing gluten, that our antibodies aren't going up, but her antibodies were actually going down. Again, that tailored approach where you figure out exactly what's inflaming your patient, what's causing those glucose spikes, what is changing your hormones and what isn't, really can be helpful. And then her prolactin normalized. So she didn't even need cabergoline, because I think that it was her high insulin that was mediating some of her thyroid and her prolactin and really throwing off her whole endocrine system. And then, like we talked about, she had that LH surge and she ovulated on her own. So it's very exciting for her. And then here's another patient who has a similar story, in that she came to me because she was trying to get pregnant. She's 37, had never been pregnant in her entire life, had been trying to conceive for years, and she had regular cycles. And this is a person who sometimes people are told that they have regular cycles and everything is normal. But clearly, if you're trying to conceive for 2 years and you can't get pregnant, then it's not normal. So there's a little bit of digging that we have to do. She is vegan, and she was vegan her whole life. And so sometimes people say, what's the best diet, or is it okay to be this? And there's nothing universal. Like, you really want to learn what your metabolism is, what your hormone balance is. And if you want to be vegan, great. We just have to sometimes work a little harder, like get you the amount of protein that you need, that kind of a thing. So you can definitely be vegan or have a certain diet or lifestyle. You just want to make sure that it's ideal for your specific body. And then she was working out and walking and weightlifting. So seeming to be a really, really healthy person. Her AMH was 2.5, which we would consider as a good egg quality. And then her FSH and her estradiol were okay. Her thyroid was a little bit high, so her TSH was a little high for what we'd like to see. So I said, okay, well, let's figure out what your hormones are doing. Because it's when sometimes you go to your doctor and they tell you, oh, everything's normal. And I say, okay, well, it's not normal. We got to look into that. So look at her estrogen, which is black on Mira, was really, really high. Like being 600 is extremely high. So I talked to her and I said, okay, we have to figure out, why is your estrogen so high? Is it phytoestrogens? Is it something that you're eating? Like, what is fueling this really, really elevated estrogen production? Because she's ovulating, she's getting that LH surge that we want to see, she's getting that progesterone rise, but she doesn't have a healthy estrogen to progesterone balance and ratios in the follicular or the luteal phase. And that really affects, you can see how she has this huge dip in mid-luteal phase of her estrogen and progesterone. So clearly she's not making a healthy corpus luteal cyst because her hormones, her body's not able to sustain that high hormone production throughout the entire luteal phase. So I checked her thyroid antibodies and they were really high, and she had never been told that she had Hashimoto's before. So that's a big cause of inflammation that we need to address. And then sometimes people, if they tend to be a little bit more anxious, it can be helpful to check their cortisol levels again, because sometimes the numbers are really, really helpful. So if they say, oh my gosh, my cortisol is through the roof, I really need to do things that actually bring my cortisol levels down and help some of my stress and anxiety, it gives them something to work with, so we can check a before and after and make sure that the interventions are actually having an impact on them. And then I had her do continuous glucose monitoring, because I wanted to know, is there foods that are spiking you? Like, why is your estrogen so high? So one thing she was realizing was that she was vegan, but she really wasn't eating well. She was eating tons of white bread, tons of tofu, and soy is a phytoestrogen. So her estrogen was through the roof. And she said, oh my gosh, Sarah, I thought I was eating so healthy and being so good because I was vegan. And I realized that I really wasn't being healthy at all. And she needed way more protein. So we talked about increasing her protein intake, and then she switched some of her grains, so she wasn't eating so many white and refined carbohydrates. And then we just reduced some of her phytoestrogen intake and soy, tofu, things like that. And then when she was doing her glucose monitoring, it really enabled her to see that the food she was eating was spiking her glucose and could cause increased estrogen. And then I started her on DIM to help her metabolize some of that estrogen. And then she did things like heart rate variability monitoring. We started her on some adaptogens. We improved her sleep because she was having horrible sleep. And those things can really impact ovulation. So part of that whole body holistic approach is to look at all those different things in your patients and make sure there's nothing else in their life that's affecting these things that you're seeing in their endocrine system on their Mira. So she came to me and she said, Sarah, I don't believe you, but I'm going to do it because I'm a data person. And this is within 1 month. So you saw before, her estrogen was extremely high. In 1 month, just by doing those minor changes, just by changing the way she eats, changing the way that she manages stress and inflammation, she completely transformed her levels. So now her estrogens has these beautiful curves of going from low to high around the time of ovulation, and her estrogen and her progesterone are balanced, and she has a really healthy 13-day luteal phase. So this was also really empowering for her to see this data, to say, oh my gosh, it really works. Like, what I'm doing is actually working. I can see it. So it's really helpful for patients to be able to see that. And then this was the second cycle. And then she got pregnant on this cycle. It's kind of fun on Mira. You can see their LH rising if they get pregnant. So within 2 cycles, she was pregnant, and she didn't need any ovulation medication. She didn't need any Hormones, all she needed was a really specific approach to her life and her diet and hormones and her glucose spikes. And she was able to get her hormones into a place where she was able to get pregnant in 2 cycles. So it's fun to be able to just see this data. It's extremely empowering for women and enables you as a provider to give an approach that is specifically tailored to each individual person. So you can see her estrogen dominance was significantly improved with just changing some of the grains that she ate, incorporating protein, incorporating omega-3s, things like that, and then taking DIM to help her body metabolize that estrogen. And then in 2 cycles, she was able to get pregnant. And this is a person who had seen many, many, many other providers, and they had told her that everything was normal. So sometimes it does really help to do a little bit more digging and get some data and figure out exactly what's going on.
And reminder, she had been trying to conceive for 2 years. So it's even more amazing when you find out that the work you did over, we'll say, 2 or 3 months made that much of a difference, not only to conceive, but her data. So there's lots of questions for you in the chat about the specifics of your treatment. We will try to get to as many of them as we can in the Q&A, but we'll quickly go through some actual practical tips for those who want these tools in their practice. So those who are interested in using a CGM, of course, you can just prescribe a CGM to your patient, but often we hear that providers have a difficult time obtaining CGMs, or it's too expensive, or they're not a prescribing provider, so they can't get access to them. So the Thea app really is a platform for you because you can once you have an account through Thea, they manage the prescribing and the shipping of the CGM directly to your patient. So you don't need to be a prescribing provider to get one for your patient, to get them that real day-to-day data. The patient and you can see their, of course, their glucose fluctuations, but also that analysis that Thea provides. So if you're interested in this, you can scan the QR code. It's also in the chat if you'd like to click the link instead. If you're interested in starting to do hormone testing in your practice, it's as simple as scheduling a meeting with our clinical team. So you can scan the QR code right on the screen, or again, in the chat, you will see a link. So go ahead and click on the link or scan the QR code. During the meeting with our clinical team, we'll go through the details about how you can get a device to your patient, about our trial phase. During a trial phase, you can experience hormone testing for yourself. So if you want to get that firsthand experience, or you can trial it on a patient. So again, scan that QR code if you're interested. That QR code will be available in the following slides as well. We have a couple of partnership options. So if you're thinking, you want to do hormone testing in your practice, how do you get this device to your patient? Well, for any of those providers that attend one of the meetings with our team, we will automatically give you a provider discount code. That provider discount code is pretty significant. It's 20% off all the time. We have no minimum purchase, no maximum number of times it can be used. It can also be combined with our wand subscription discounts, making the wands almost 30% off. So it's a huge benefit for you to get a discount code for your clients and patients. Additionally, we have an optional affiliate partnership. This is where the patient continues to receive the high discount, but now you can generate commission based on those purchases. So again, that's an optional program you can do if you'd like to. We also have a drop ship program. This is essentially where you incorporate the cost of a Mira into maybe a program, a course, or a package deal. And then when the patient purchases that from you, you go on the website and order the device on their behalf. You can also do the drop shipping if you want to order on behalf of the patient and then just invoice them or bill them for it as well. That makes it so we handle all the shipping. The patient just receives it based on your recommendation. The last is bulk purchasing. This one typically works best for practices in person. You buy in bulk and then you sell back to the patient. It's at a higher discount of 35%. Because it's invoice-based, there's no sales tax. There is a minimum purchase and you do have to pay shipping. But again, there's lots of partnership options here. You can do all of them, none of them, a combination. These are all will be explained in detail in the session. So again, if you are interested in booking one of those sessions with our team, go ahead and scan this QR code or click on the link that is in the chat. Our team members have been putting that in there for you. So we'll go ahead and I'll put the last poll question up. But we're going to start the Q&A. I apologize. We are not going to be able to get to all the questions because there are quite a few of them. So thank you again for all attending and asking the questions. We'll try to get through as many as we can here. So it looks like there was quite a few questions for Dr. Peterson about some of the treatment things that you do. So we'll go ahead and do a couple of them, but we'll also write them up later just so you can see. So it looks like some other providers are helping answer things as well. So what DIM is, but let's go to, they were asking about your, let's see, digestive enzymes that you like, and also about IgG. Are you able to answer those?
Yeah, and I use my gut health test that I usually do is GI effects from Genova. And so based on that data, I give certain recommendations for certain things. For example, people have a leaky gut or they have dysbiosis, that kind of a thing. So a lot of times I'll use, for example, Orthospore IgG for people that aren't having healthy gut microbiome in their large intestine, because that's essential to estrogen metabolism, for example. And then I also do digestive enzymes based on what it comes back. So for example, like if they need a lot of lipase or they need a lot of amylase, I'll try to tailor those things toward exactly what it comes back.
Okay, thank you. And there's also some questions here. I think probably everyone can answer this one of like why someone might get spiked by like, how do I want to say that? The question was like, why does ancient grain spike her blood sugar, but then when she eats gluten, it doesn't? So any one of you answer about those diet things and how a CGM might teach you about your patient?
I think one thing to know is that it's so different for everyone's body. Everyone has something that I call no foods that you just cannot eat because they spike you really high. And carbohydrates really affect people quite differently. For example, some people can eat all the sweet potatoes in the whole world and their glucose is completely flat. Some people eat one sweet potato and it really spikes. So grains are really specific. And usually what I tell people is, for the first week or so that you're doing it, experiment. Like try different grains, try different orders of food, try things that you would eat, like have cauliflower crust pizza, try gluten things, try ancient grains, and then experiment and see exactly what it does to your body so that you get a sense and that you can really hone in on what kind of grains you can be eating and what makes you feel good.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that is on the experiment piece, right? Like the order in which you eat your foods too. Like if you're eating it amongst a protein and fat and fiber rich meal, it is likely to have a different response from a blood sugar perspective. And then if you're eating like whole, complex carbohydrates versus refined carbohydrates, that's also going to play a role as well. So yeah, I also recommend the same thing. Like use it, as a fun experiment and try all the different things. Like this is the time to spike your blood sugar so that what is actually the cause of, your blood sugar imbalances.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. I was going to say the same thing of even that example of the person eating the sourdough pancakes, for example. If she would have eaten that after maybe eggs and sausage, then the blood sugar could have been completely different, even if the same food item was eaten. So I think it's, of course, very complex, but that is the purpose of this in-depth hormone tracking and this in-depth CGM analysis. We have a question in the chat about viewing your patient's data. So we talked about how on the Thea app you can view your patient's data, but we failed to mention that Mira does have a dashboard as well that you can, it's a HIPAA compliant and also follow European guideline standards to view your patient's data in real time. It's a very easy process. The patients have control of their data at all times. And if they want to share data with you, it's a very simple, they scan your unique QR code. It asks them consent. Do you agree to share data with, let's say, Dr. Sarah Peterson? They say yes, and then they will upload themselves into your dashboard. You can see their data in real time. So if you have an appointment this afternoon and you want to see what their, let's say, hormone levels were this morning, you can already see that uploaded into the dashboard. Okay, let's see.
I think as a provider too, it's extremely powerful because you can change something in real time. For example, if someone's estrogen is really high in their luteal phase, for example, those are days where you can do a little bit more exercise, a little bit more HIIT, a little bit more spin, eat a few Same thing how you can check your glucose monitoring, like eat less carbohydrates or less carbohydrates that are spiking your glucose, those types of things. So it's kind of cool as a provider because you can also give them implementations in real time about what their hormones are doing by looking at their core.
Yes, yes, thank you. There's also a question in the chat about can you see CGM data and Mira data in the same place? So currently, no, but there is discussions about integration where we can see both data at the same time. And so if that would be something helpful to you in your practice, please feel free to give us and Thea feedback on what would be useful to you as a provider, because really both of these companies, our goal is to empower you as a clinician to take the best care of your patient. And so if there's something that would be useful to you, like you gave us feedback about wanting resources or provider courses, please let us know. We'd be happy to provide those. Okay, I think that unfortunately we've run out of time. So right now, if you have additional questions that we have not answered, please go ahead and write them in the chat. Like I promised, we will type up answers to them and include them in the follow-up. So if there's, again, something that we did not answer for you, we will work on that and get it to you afterwards. Thank you again for all of your time today. We are so happy that as a clinician, you want to take the best care of your patient possible by looking at their hormone data and, of course, their glucose insulin regulation. So thank you again. If you are having issues with the links in the chat, we will email them to you as well, along with this recording and the slideshow and all the resources. So thank you again. Have a wonderful day.